I'm here to formally announce that I will not seek to represent the 6th District in Congress for another term. This is a decision I reached after serious thought and consideration with my family and others. I'd like to express my sincere thanks to my fellow citizens for entrusting me with the responsibility of representing them for the last 35 years. It's been a great honor. Best wishes to whoever is elected to represent us in the next Congress. He or she will have an opportunity to turn the great prospects before our country into concrete reality. I look forward to continuing to serve the people of the 6th District for the remainder of this year. I'd like to also take a minute to thank the staff in our congressional office for all their hard work on behalf of the citizens, past and present staff, for all their hard work over many years. Certainly very much appreciated by me, and I know by many of the citizens of our district who wanted to have some service and were able to get it. We can't always get the job done, but we can always try, and that was what our motto really was. So again, thank you, and I don't know if anyone has any particular question they'd like to ask from the media, but yes, sir.
Tom, can you just talk a little bit about your reasoning for wanting to retire?
Well, you know, any decision to retire involves 101 different considerations, and there was no particular one decision, one thing that's worth singling out over others. Sooner or later, you either are booted out, die, or retire, and I figure 35 years is a pretty good start, and no time is perfect, but this was a pretty good time. One thing I really do want to say, though, too, it's worth mentioning in that connection, and that is that not only has it been an honor to represent the 6th Congressional District, it really is, I think, if you get the chance to represent a district, you learn a lot more about it because you're traveling around, not just driving through on 41, but stopping in little towns and villages and so on and so forth. And our district, believe it or not, we think of ourselves as cheeseheads and America's Dairyland and all the rest. We're the number 4 of the 435 congressional districts in the United States in the percentage of people who have jobs in manufacturing. We are the industrial heartland of our country, and that's up from number 6 just a couple of years ago. These small towns all have dozens of factories. Out in the countryside there are factories, and people who go to work every morning do a really good job, and they're internationally competitive. So that's been an exciting thing to learn about, and of course people love the environment here, want to be good stewards of it, and we've got a beautiful state. People accept responsibility here. You can't go to a town where people aren't active in their church council or in different service clubs or you know, PTA or in local government. There are tens of thousands of people here in our district who at one point or another in their life are helping others, and that's what makes it such a great place to live.
Mr. Petri, you've been known as a moderate in your long tenure in Congress. Where do you think the Republican Party is going, and do you think that the kind of right-leaning faction of the party had anything to do with your decision to step away?
Well, I think the focus really needs to be on both political parties. There are a lot of strange resolutions. I know there's some resolutions in the paper about the Republican. Someone ought to go and read the Democratic resolutions of the last few years at their convention and give equal time to some of the sort of remarkable things that they put on the agenda. I once ran, I thought, with the list of what the Democratic platform was, because it seemed so outrageous, and no one would believe it was true. So, because it's not in the media very much.
But did the quote-unquote Tea Party wing of the party have any effect, like with Mr. Grothman announcing a primary challenge against you? Did that have any impact on your decision?
Well, as I indicated, there were dozens of factors of every sort, and I don't think it would be fair to pick out any one. That certainly wasn't an outstanding one.
What would you like people to know about your legacy in Congress?
Well, I think I'd like people to know that I've worked hard. We've tried to work as a good team. I've tried to put the interests of our country and the state first and focus on getting things done for the area rather than self-advancement. And among those things, which is not really talked about or glamorous, was to get a change in the federal highway formula, which has produced over the last years of service on that committee over $1 billion for the state of Wisconsin. Not new spending, but spending that would have otherwise gone to other states. And so that's money that's being spent here in Wisconsin that would have otherwise been spent in Texas or you name it, and creating jobs here, creating beautiful infrastructure like expanding of 41 and the Marquette interchange and all these other things. And that doesn't just happen. It takes a lot of work. And being chairman of the highway subcommittee certainly didn't hurt in that regard. Getting rid of the interstate, people talk about trying to do things to cut back on spending and all the rest. Getting rid of the Interstate Commerce Commission, the first oldest regulatory agency, was something we was able to do in previous legislation. Getting rid of the regional offices of the Department of Transportation, putting in, after a great fight, something called cost-sharing formulas for federal water projects. That actually ends up saving lots of money, because if the federal government comes in and says, we're going to pay 100% of your harbor improvement, well, fine. But if you're going to pay 20 or 30% yourself, suddenly you look at it and say, well, maybe we could cut back here, cut back there. It's just a way of making sure that people are spending money more responsibly. And that took an enormous fight, because it reduced the discretion of people on the committee, but was put into effect after a fight of a couple of Congresses, and still is a law. And I don't know the number that it's ended up saving, but I'm sure it's substantial. So there are a few. And the student loan area, working to reform the student loan program. Of course, we're in the midst of trying to get something called income contingent student loan repayment, which would help young people by not locking them into fixed payments when they're maybe not able to find a job right after school or earn very little. And that's been done in Australia and England, other countries. I think it's going to be done here, but we're gaining support for that, and I've been working on that for a number of years. The earned income tax credit reform, this was a bill that was worked on when I was the ranking Republican on the Labor Standards Committee, that has jurisdiction over the minimum wage. And it became, these minimum wage debates are up there now, but they come up every 5 or 6 years, and they have since the 1930s. And it's, always the wage. And it doesn't work really well economically always, because the wage rates in different parts of the country are different. So people's skills are different. Family size, different needs vary. So the earned income tax credit is a way of supplementing people's wages. All of us feeling if people need more, we should be chipping in rather than just ordering a small businessman who may be struggling himself to pay more money. And it can vary according to family size. So that was passed. And so when we talk about the minimum wage debate today, we should realize that people who are low income are not earning just the minimum wage. They're earning minimum wage plus the earned income tax credit. But that's another thing that's not accurately reported in most cases. Well, that's probably more than enough. Yeah.
Just one last question. Given when you first came into Congress compared to now, the number of members of Congress who voted across party lines has narrowed significantly. For whoever succeeds you, what would be your advice in terms of where you need to make those compromises and where you have to hold the line on your principles?
My advice would be to recognize that there's a difference between being a competitor and being an enemy. And a competition can be constructive, certainly for the consumer, because you have choices and you can take your business elsewhere, and it helps to come up with better products as people compete and all the rest. Now, if you're one of the producers, you don't necessarily like the competition because it's a lot of work. But from the point of view of the consumer, it's a good thing. But it can be destructive if it's overdone and people are concentrating not on doing a better job, but on trying to destroy the other company or the other product. And so I would say that people in both parties, each party is a coalition, number one. They're not uniform. Number two, they're all Americans, and people don't run around asking which party you're in when you used to go down to the draft board, and people have served with great distinction, regardless of background, from both political parties, and we need to keep that in mind too. Now, we may have strong disagreements, but that doesn't mean we disagree on everything, and look for areas that you can agree on. You will find in the Congress, people who serve on different committees serve there often because they have an interest in that particular subject, and they find areas that they can actually work together. And you don't see as much of the partisanship in most of the committees. The Transportation Committee on which I serve, for example, is very works pretty well. There's not a Republican or Democratic way to build roads. There are differences, but we are all interested in keep having first-rate infrastructure here in this country, and we try to work together, because if we do work together, we can be a lot more effective in getting transportation legislation through the whole Congress. So that's one observation. The only other thing is that since, well, really going back 20 years, there's been a big shift in the power in the Congress from committee chairmen and committees to leadership, whether it's in the Democratic or Republican House leadership. And the leadership's job's a little different. It's sort of to make the partisan fight and to lead the party, and when you put everything through that sieve, it tends to expand the area of conflict. And the second trouble is that leadership staff's expertise is not in a lot of the areas that the committee and members and staff is, so you get lower quality legislation. The last thing I'd say is people complain about gridlock, but in fact, if you stop and think about what happened in our country, we had no gridlock. We elected a single party to control the president, the House, and the Senate, and President Obama came to the House Republicans and said he was president, he'd just been elected, and gentlemen, elections have consequences, and I won. And rather than working to try to pick the best ideas of both parties, or seeing at least, they passed with a straight party line vote the health care bill, which we all know is an important area. There are things that need to be addressed, but it also is not a perfect piece of legislation. And the result was to elect the Republican Congress to prevent, I think, on the part of the people who voted for that majority, this sort of thing from being rammed through in cap and trade and some of the environmental energy areas and a whole variety of other things that does cause gridlock. That doesn't mean, though, that there aren't certainly areas of progress that could well be made by, across party lines, even if there's gridlock on some of those areas. Well, I've talked about enough, and we've got to get someone else. It's supposed to be a listening session. So one last, yeah.
Just briefly, what do you plan to do next, and will you be endorsing anybody in the upcoming election?
Well, I would say this. I very much hope if anyone is listening or watching or reading about this who lives in the 6th Congressional District or nearby, that they if they're thinking about running, that they give it serious thought. And I'd be happy to meet with anyone if I can be of any resource. I'm hoping there would be a good, qualified field of candidates with different perspectives in both political parties. Winnebago County, where we're meeting today, is the largest county by far in the district and has always been pretty much the heart of the 6th district, but there are a dozen counties in the district, and there will be people, I think, from throughout the district who will seek to run. I have no idea who all the candidates are going to be. I'm pretty sure there are one or two who have announced and unannounced and announced again, kind of like me, I guess. And we'll have to see who the whole field is before. But I believe voters are probably quite capable of making up their own mind without my advice.
And what do you plan to do next, personally?
I plan on finishing out my term, obviously, and working as hard as I can, doing a good job, and then I'm open to any suggestions or ideas. I don't have a particular agenda.
Following your announcement on Friday, what's the status of the House Ethics Committee investigation, and did that play any role in your decision?
It was, as you know, I file my reports and try to be accurate. These rather interesting stories were written, and I asked that if there's something that I did wrong, if they investigated. I one of the penalties of that is that you then have to hire lawyers. My lawyer advises me not to talk about it, the ethics, because I might annoy the ethics committee. So it's a work in progress. I'm disappointed. Well, I'm not even going to talk about it because I believe that it'll all work out fine, because I know that it was one of these things that was made up. But a lot of people own Oshkosh stock. I've worked for Oshkosh Truck Company. It wasn't an effort to hike my stock. I bought some at 50 and it went down to 3 or 4, as a lot of other people around here know, and it's gradually come back, and that's the way of the world. But the company's having to, unfortunately, lay some people off now, and we're eager to work to try to help them as best we can, despite any charges that might be made that that's somehow a bad thing to do. Well, thank you very much on that.